Hello, welcome back to Sterling Armory for our Oakeshott Typology series. If you're new to the channel, basically this series is just covering what is known as the Oakeshott Typology, which is basically a classification of medieval swords. So if you're in the market for swords, or if you've been looking at medieval swords in the last, 5-10 years, you might notice that they're named based on like a numeric Roman numeral system, and that is the Oakeshott Typology. So basically, if you want a more detailed explanation of it, please go back to our first video in the series, because I go into it a little more in detail. And then today we're trying to get back to the order we were in, because I messed up the order with our episode 3. We kind of went out of order. But a couple quick notes too, which I haven't really said as much since the first episode. So again, the typology is basically Oakeshott's way of classifying swords in their development throughout the medieval times, and how they responded, and how the designs changed. I'm talking with my hands a lot. How the designs changed based on armor development. So it's basically the development of swords from the 10th century all the way up to the 16th, 17th century. So the reason why we use it is because it's very easy. So if you want to know what the type of sword is and a rough estimate on how it's going to feel and what its purpose is, then if you know the type of blade that is in the Oakeshott Typology, it'll give you a better understanding of it, of the blade. So today we started with, and apologies by the way, because if you find us through Facebook and you see Oakeshott Typology, and typology is actually spelled topology, T-O-P. That's autocorrect changing my posts from type to top, and I didn't catch it several times, and it just automatically does it every time I write topology. So a couple great viewers reached out and said, "Hey, by the way, it's topology, or it's typology, not topology, T-O-P." And I was like, "What?" Like, I didn't realize I typed that, and I didn't. It's the autocorrect. So if you do see that in any of our videos posted anywhere, let us know, because I didn't catch it last time until the video was already shared multiple times. So yeah, typology, not topology. So we started with, there's 2 main groups in the typology. So group 1 is everything that was every blade designed to mainly for cutting and mainly against chainmail or chain armor. And then swords in group 2, so type 15 and up, is everything designed to combat mostly plate armor. And so that's kind of the 2 big groups in the typology. And here at Sterling Armory, and myself in particular, I tend to gravitate towards making blades in the type 2, so type 15s, type 18s are my favorite 2 to make. Type 16, which we're going to talk about today, is also on that list. Yeah, so today's, we started with 15, and then we went 18, and then we sidetracked a little bit because we had an example in-house of a type 12, so we kind of went back to a type 12. Now we're picking back up on the type 16s in group 2. So real quick, as we say in every episode, there's 2 books we're going off of, and that is Oakeshott's Sword in the Age of Chivalry. It was originally released in the 60s, but they updated it in 94, I believe it was. Yeah, 94. There was an update to it, so I don't think you can find the original, but the new one you can get. It's more up to date anyway. So the Sword in the Age of Chivalry, if you want a book that describes more of the typology and his thought process, it's this one. And this one also goes in the guard shapes and pommel shapes and all those classifications. Talks about a lot. Then a second book is Records of the Medieval Sword. If you want to see more historical examples of each type, that's this book. So basically, he goes over the types using historical examples in this book. And this was also released, I believe, in the 90s. So yeah. So those are the 2 books. I recommend both of them. They're not too expensive, and it's very much a good resource if you like medieval blades. And then also, I usually I forget this on a lot of our videos, but online, the forum My Armory and ARMOURY, I think it's the British spelling of Armory. They are a valuable web source where they've taken, if you look at the featured content, I remembered it this time, featured content, and if you go to the featured content page, they do good descriptions of the Oakeshott topology as well. They show lots of images. The way they have it laid out is great. They're not a sponsor of us. We're not a sponsor of them either. But if you can go on there and help them out, it's great. Actually, I think I wanted to be a sponsor of them a while ago, and I don't know what happened. I know I did pay for or I sponsored them way back, like 10, 12 years ago. Yeah, I should probably get back on that. But they are a great resource, and yeah, jump there if you can. I'll have the link in the comments below as well. But again, my main thing was we're not tied to them, so we're not trying to sell anything or anything like that. So, real quick, in the topology, there are a lot of blades that can be confused for one or the other, and I think Type 16, the arming sword version, very much falls into that, because Type 16s and Type 14s, I think, are often mixed up. So I kind of want to cover that today. And then on the longsword side, so Type 16 has a longsword version, whereas Type 14 doesn't. So on the Type 16 longsword side, those are often confused with Type 18As. So just want to cover the little differences in which separate the two for both the arming sword and the longsword. And I don't have any examples of Type 16s today. I have one that could go longsword-wise. It could go in a 16A, but it's more of a Type 18A, and I might grab that when we get there. But I have some images on screen, and so it'll be my first time sharing images. Hopefully it works. Please let me know if you like the images below, whereas instead of just showing off pieces I have here in hand. Okay, I've rambled a lot. It's already 7 minutes in. So what is a Type 16? So real quick, if I go to his page and the description, so the nice thing with Type 16, the description doesn't really change like other types do from book to book. Pretty much stays the same. So it's a strongly tapering blade. This is a single hand version I'm talking about. Strongly tapering blade of medium length, so 28 32 inches. The upper half of the blade is broad, of a strong section with a well-marked deep fuller, which extends a little over half the length of the blade. The lower half of the blade tapers to an acute point, and this is a key point, and is of a stiff, solid, four-sided flattened diamond section. So that's the big difference from between that and the Type 14. So after the fuller, and I'll show an example here in a second. So if you look at a blade, it has the fuller, and then after the fuller, it has a very thin lenticular cross-section. Even if it has a slight midrib to it, that's a Type 14. But if that section is a very thick, but still flattened diamond, but very stiff section, that's a Type 16. And they can look the same from a 2D image, which you'll see here in a minute. Okay, so that's the Type 16. And then the longsword version, which is the 16A, is a long tapering blade, broad at the hilt, with a sharp point, often strongly reinforced. The fuller is well marked, often, missed my section here. Often quite short, so about a third of the blade length, rarely more than half the blade length. The lower part of the blade is not of diamond section, but of a stout, flattened hexagonal section. And then the grip is long, like a Type 15 or a Type 18A, or 18B, sorry. So those are the two different types. Now, the tricky thing with the hexagonal section he's talking about for a 16A longsword is he's not consistent in where that hexagonal shape is, or how long or how much of the blade that hexagonal section is. And that causes confusion between a 16A and an 18A. So let's dive into some images and talk about these a little bit more in detail. So some of the images I have are blades that are my own, and then some are, let's see if this works here. There we go. So again, let me know if this is a good way to present the topologies. If it is, I'll keep doing it this way for swords I don't have in hand, or even if I do have them in hand. If this is easier to see, please let me know. So this is a Type 16 that I made myself. I think this was last year, I think. But I actually misclassified this as a 14 myself when I first made it, because that's just where my brain was at the time. But this blade from the fuller down, you can't see my cursor, I don't think, but from the fuller down, that's a very stiff flattened diamond cross section. It's not lenticular at all, and it's very stiff. It's not too flexible. So that's what makes that a Type 16. But again, if you were to put this right next to a Type 14 and you didn't know the difference in thickness, then you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Usually Type 14s have wider, not quite as defined fullers as well, but that's not always the case. So here's a Type 16 that I've got a chance to study, and this is an image right out of his books. But if you look at from the fuller down to the tip, it's a very, very stiff, very thrust-centric tip to it. If I can talk right, I can't talk right now. So again, if you were to look at that, actually, let's look at next slide. So here's the confusion, right? You can see it. So there's two Type 14s, and then there's a Type 16 in the middle. If you ignore the handles and just look at the blades, they all look roughly the same. That's because we're looking at them from a 2D point of view. If you were to pick each of these blades up, you would feel a big difference. So basically, the first blade and the third blade there are very, very thin blades, very flexible, very light blades. Whereas the middle blade, it's still light, but it's heavier than those other two and a much stiffer, much thicker blade. So that's the way you would tell the difference. So as we talked about with the Type 15 and Type 18s, you can't always go by the two-dimensional image. You need to see the blade in 3 dimensions. So the other thing is the opposite works as well. So if you were to see these blades advertised, and if the maker classified them correctly, you can tell the difference between the blades and which one's going to be thicker and stouter and maybe a little bit heavier based on their type. So if you're looking at one instead of 14 and one that says a 16, but they look the same, then you know the 16 is going to should be a stiffer blade. So hopefully that helps. And then I think we jump to, so now we're jumping to the long swords. So this is a 16A I made a long time ago. And so this 16A has a pretty wide crossguard. One of the things, I don't think he mentions it, but a lot of Type 16s have very, very short, very stubby crossguards, which you'll see when we look at some historical examples in a sec. This particular one, though, I did a longer cross on it, and it's hard to tell, but where the fuller is, and then a couple inches beyond the fuller, it's a hexagonal cross-section, and then it transfers to a diamond cross-section the rest of the way. So that's where the confusion kind of comes in. This could be, some people might call this an 18A or B now with the later later topology. And there's really nothing it's hard to tell the difference because for the Type 16A, there's no definition on how long that hexagonal section should be. And again, if anybody else has better knowledge on that, let me know. But in my, from what I've read, he's all over the place with that. So it's not an exact science, and I think everyone knows who studied the topology for a while, including Oakeshott himself. He said, it's not exact, it's just a rough estimate. So the big difference and why I would call this a 16 versus an 18 is if that fuller was not there, you would see a hexagonal cross-section. Whereas a Type 18, if that fuller wasn't there, you should see a diamond cross-section. And that makes a big difference in the blade, especially the difference in the weight. The edge geometry on the 16 is much stouter because you're coming from a hex down instead of from a diamond down. So that makes it a bit different. I think there's a couple swords out there that I think Albion does one of their museum lines where they're like, it could be either one. And it's pretty much similar to to what I'm saying here, whereas it could be either one, but it's probably most likely a 16. So here's some historical type 16s. If you look at the top one there, that thing has a hexagonal cross section all the way down the blade. It's very clear. It may not be clear in that image. That's not a great. So these are images right out of the books as well from his records book. But yeah, so that blade, you can kind of see where the hexagonal section is all the way down the blade, and there's a short fuller in the middle there. The bottom blade is actually one of the Royal Armories that I've also had a chance to take a close look at. It's an interesting cross section, and we'll go through that in a second. But actually, let's jump right to that right now. But that one's more like the one that I made that you see in the images above. Now, the other cool thing is, again, I mentioned the guards on Type 16s, and you don't see this often in production pieces nowadays, but I like it. They're very short. So they're short and stubby guards, and that's very common in a lot of Type 16s. And the pommels, the big, flat, round pommels I really like, are very common on Type 16s, and you just don't see it much in the reproduction world. In fact, the only ones that I know that do that is probably the Deltin version. He has a couple Type 16s that have that, but you don't see it too often. So here's that one on display at the Royal Armories, and it's hard to tell if you look at it closely, but this actually has two different sections going on. So where that fuller is, it's definitely a hexagonal cross section, but then in the middle of that hex, there is a slight raised diamond section. So it's not really a hex, it's more like an octagonal section. Because there is a slight central ridge down the whole side, even though if you were to ignore that ridge, you can still see the ridges running alongside of it that make it a hexagonal section. So it's kind of a mix of both, but he does classify it as a 16A, and he actually uses this as one of his prime examples. So I think that is it for the slides. So yeah, that's Type 16. How do I get back to... There we go. So that's what a Type 16 is. Hopefully you can tell the difference now between a Type 16 arming sword and a Type 14 arming sword. Again, the major difference is the Type 16 is diamond, whereas the Type 14 is more lenticular. And the biggest difference is Type 16 is a stiff blade, Type 14 is not. So if you pick up a Type 14 blade and it's stiff, they might have classified that blade wrong, and it's probably a Type 16. And the difference being is it would be used in a different time period, right? So the Type 16s are used a little bit later, more with plate armor, whereas the Type 14s are a little bit older blades. But again, they look very similar. And then the Type 16As, the longswords, are basically, the way I think of them is a Type 18 that has a flattened section in the middle. That's the way I personally think of them based on his descriptions. But again, that hexagonal part somewhere on that blade pulls it from a Type 18 into a Type 16. So basically the difference is a Type 16 will have a more stouter edge. Type 16A will have a more stouter edge. So like if you're cutting tatami, a Type 18 is going to cut better. If you're cutting bamboo, a Type 16 might cut better, just because you have a stouter edge. Now that again is a very general statement. That's not always true, but that's a good way to think about it. Okay, so thanks for joining us. Hopefully you're liking this topology videos. I know I ramble a lot, and this is a 20-minute video, whereas our other ones are only 10. I don't think it needed to be that long, but I'll leave it in full length. And if you have any questions, please comment below. And the next video we're going to do is Type 17. And that one will probably be short because there isn't much to a Type 17. But yeah, comment below, join the conversation, find us on Facebook, go to the My Armory website if you're interested in more topology stuff, and get the books. All right. So thank you very much, and hopefully I can end this properly this time.